You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
All right, welcome everybody back to the Barbell Logic podcast. I'm joined here with CJ.
Ahoy.
All right. Wanted to make sure I left enough room for you to get your ahoy in. I wonder how many people who are listening say ahoy back to you.
Oh, almost none. It's great.
None.
It's the best.
That's great. So CJ and I are going to talk about imposter syndrome today, which is a really interesting topic. I think it's encountered in all walks of life where you're trying to become better at something. But we want to talk about how we've experienced it, what it really means, and some ideas on how to deal with it. But first off, CJ, what is your kind of 30-second version of, or I guess 30-second definition of imposter syndrome?
Sure. So with imposter syndrome, there's kind of a scale, really. But most people have it as this experience of self-doubt, this fear and anxiety about feeling like they will be exposed as imposters. They might be discovered, or people might realize I don't deserve to be here. Along with just that general self-doubt, like I can't handle this thing, I feel overwhelmed. So there's a bit of, several feelings that can kind of tie into it. And particularly when that feeling persists through evidence. So you have the qualifications, you have the experience, you have the testimonials, you've done the thing, and yet you still can't get over this, this sinking feeling like I totally do not belong here. Like I shouldn't be coaching.
Well, I have never experienced any of those emotions. So.
Ever.
And that's a lie. Pretty much every day. And why is it really relevant to coaches?
For coaches in particular, you mentioned that it's almost universal. In the literature, I think this is true. It's almost universal. There's some places they haven't actually looked, which is interesting. But especially in coaches and knowledge workers and people kind of in the modern, like the service industry, it seems to be really prevalent. In the sense that there's this big space of, well, yeah, sure, I may have the knowledge, but does that mean I have the skill? If I do all the right things, the other person, the client, has to execute it and do it. So there's all this space between the proof of my expertise and that broad scope of challenges that I ended up dealing with, to the point where it becomes really easy to ask, like, am I an imposter? Do I know what's going on? And so a lot of coaches in every coaching group I'm a part of, every podcast, everything I listen to, you constantly hear like, hey guys, I'm feeling this thing. You too?
It seems to come with what it's like in hindsight are like milestones where you get a new client, you lose a client, you get hired, you get promoted, you all of a sudden become trusted with a new project. And it's like your performance is on the line in the eyes of other people who are trusting you to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. My personal experience of it has been very much that. So you can kind of, as a coach, you start getting into the okay, I'm familiar with this. I know what I'm doing. So the day-to-day execution of the job. I got the programming, the conversations, all that. And then, like you said, a client leaves, or a client, takes on like, hey, I want to do this new thing. I want to do a half marathon, or and I've never coached someone through strength and support of a half marathon, or all of a sudden these feelings that you thought you'd managed in the day-to-day routine just come right back up again.
And it's like what you wanted. You're like, you want to be a strength coach, and now you are a strength coach. Then it's like, wait, am I a strength coach?
Well, that's an interesting piece to it too, because we almost feel guilty about having these feelings. The whole study of imposter syndrome, the term itself, came about a researcher. She was studying women in particular. She thought that executive women, women in authority, would particularly strongly have these feelings because that was her experience as a researcher. And the more they got into, and other researchers picked up on this concept, the more we realized, like, not only does everyone have it, but for the longest time, people didn't realize that we all shared this experience because everyone felt guilty to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you don't want to like let the person who just hires you know that you're afraid that you don't know what the heck you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things where it feels better to not know than to risk asking someone or reaching out and having, like, hey, I'm having these feelings. Are you like, do you feel that too? Nah, bro, that's just you.
It's just you're like, oh no.
That would be the worst. And so
Yeah,
for
it really
years
would
and
be.
years, we just, a research community, but also just, you didn't see it in the literature. You didn't see it in the conversation around business because people didn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally know what you mean. And I only started learning about this, I think it was a few years ago, from a client of mine who was a software engineer, and she just gotten a promotion, and she was like, I think that they're going to find out that I don't know what I'm doing, when she knows what she's doing. And she let me know what this was. And what you just said there about people not wanting to talk about it, like, I relate to so well. For some reason, I grew up thinking that I should know everything. And only too recently, I realized that it's okay. I don't have to know everything. And man, it feels really good to admit that, and like to accept it. And like you said in here in your notes that you're questioning, like, is it a bad thing?
Yeah. You mention it because it can be so difficult to pin down exactly what it means. Like if she's experiencing this thing as an engineer, does that match your experience? Like, even when we're sharing, oftentimes we don't have the same language to share it. Now, in terms of, so you're asking, is it a bad thing? That even opens up a whole nother can of worms, because there's a whole industry now saying like, oh, we'll help fix your imposter syndrome. If you type in, imposter syndrome cure, imposter syndrome fixes, every business coach in the coaching space is promising to fix your imposter syndrome. But first we kind of have to ask, like, when is it a problem? If everyone is feeling this thing, almost everyone, like, are we pathologizing it? Are we giving it a name? Are we making this deal out of something that's just a human experience?
Right. And it seems like, it is a human experience. It's a set of emotions that occur in almost repeatable scenarios, in cycles of life. And if that's a human emotion, that usually means that there's some energy that needs to be placed somewhere to make it productive.
Yeah. For me, the frame of mind is, okay, if there is an emotion, if there is a feeling, if there is an experience that everyone has, either what did this evolve for? Because I obviously it had to evolve to something, or what is the positive value that could come out of this? I really like author that I follow. His name is Visakan Virasamy. He says, self-doubt is a sign that you care about things. And I'm probably going to butcher the paraphrase anyway, but it's essentially like you care that the person who's doing the business and taking care of people is qualified and capable and going to help them reach their goals. It's a sign that you care about that. I'd have to look it up. There was a researcher, his name will come to mind. Dr. Ferrari. Yeah, that's an easy one to remember, a name. But so Dr. Ferrari did a series of studies on imposter syndrome. And one of them, he found that students who had the most imposter feelings, at least according to survey, their self-reports, so there are limitations, but they were the least likely to cheat. They were the least likely to engage in academic dishonesty. And other studies have found, some supporting evidence that maybe having some self-doubt's a good thing.
Why do you think that is, that they would engage in less plagiarism and cheating? What's your opinion on that?
So the author himself, he opened up saying, I don't know which way this would go, because there's two sides. One is, because I have imposter feelings, I wouldn't be able to stand losing. I wouldn't be able to stand getting an actual D on the test, because that would validate my feelings and I'd feel terrible. The other side of the coin would be, because I have these imposter feelings, if the very act of cheating validates that I don't know what I'm doing. Like, getting the grade back would be terrible, but the moment of lying or cheating feels awful when I feel like a fake and a cheat. So he didn't know, which side it was going to go. And the evidence, at least from that study, pointed that people who feel these imposter feelings, maybe they like that self-doubt helps them contextualize it. Like, maybe I'm not competent, but I'm not going to make myself feel worse.
Yeah. It seems like there's an important distinction in calling it imposter syndrome versus calling it imposter feelings.
That's my personal choice. I think imposter syndrome pathologizes it. I think it makes an illness out of it. And it's interesting, in the literature, imposter syndrome is rarely used. It's usually the imposter phenomenon.
Oh, okay.
But on Google, if you type in imposter phenomena, you won't find anything outside of the research community. There's this fine line. Everyone kind of in the lay world, as coaches, we all use imposter syndrome. We kind of all know what that means.
So how do you think it becomes a good thing, or can be a good thing?
The easiest way that I think about it is I think about Elizabeth Holmes. So she was the founder of Theranos. There's some documentaries, and the whole thing appears to have been a fraud. And the whole thing blew up, millions and millions of dollars invested in this program for research that didn't exist. And I think to myself, maybe you should have felt like an imposter a little bit. That self-doubt is maybe an honest and legitimate check on what we can actually do. What's that line in Top Gun? Your ego's writing checks your body can't cash.
Yes.
Your ego's writing checks that your experience, your knowledge, your ability can't cash.
So it kind of puts some fear in you to prove yourself.
Could be. And I think that's expecting that we're going to go as coaches and feel great all the time and feel capable and competent and we've got this and we have all the answers and all the solutions. I just think that's unreasonable.
I agree. Because you're a human and you're not you're going to feel so many different things all the time. And then as a coach, you are working with a human, which is another, bag of emotions and machines and history that, you cannot control.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just a lot of stuff that you can't control. What about when it becomes a bad thing? You mentioned Elizabeth Holmes. What are other ways that maybe it can go too far?
So maybe there are times when the feelings themselves can be good. I personally kind of mentally split it. There are imposter feelings, but then there is a syndrome. In the research, there are connections between imposter syndrome and anxiety and depression. So people who struggle with anxiety and depression tend to have more imposter feelings. And so there's obviously some kind of pathological connections when they interfere with daily life.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like everything in the DSM-5, everything, a psychologist talks about. It's it becomes a illness when it interferes with daily life. And for coaches, I think the biggest thing is it causes them to miss opportunities. There are and most of our days, our daily routine, and we're kind of moving forward and we're serving the people that we serve. And then there are moments when there's a new client who this person has a new challenge or a bigger name client or a job comes up or, an opportunity that these are milestones, they're moments that could be career makers, if that, phrase means anything.
Sure.
And we're qualified, we could deliver a great service, and we turn that down out of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I was saying earlier, these feelings tend to come at moments. And those milestones are usually where you are challenged to grow. And it's that time between you have this new opportunity, you decide to go for it. And that could be a few days. It could be, a year between when you're I finally actually understand what I'm doing. That's where you have imposter syndrome. I was listening to a podcast about this and she called that zone where you're not really sure if you're doing anything right, the trough of despair.
I like that.
Yeah. She said during that time, you're trying to do things, you're working, but you can't be sure if anything's working. And that's when a lot of people are experiencing imposter feelings. And then just by showing up and acknowledging that those feelings are okay during that time, but creating some actions, you can get out of the trough of despair and push your limits of growth. It's where you get that new opportunity that you're unsure of, but you have to take that opportunity if you want to grow.
And it's such a fine line, because on the one hand, these feelings, maybe they're warning us. Like, we need to treat it like that shadow voice, treat it like that part of ourselves that needs to be voiced and express itself, and go, okay, am I ready? Like, balancing it out with all the other factors. But sometimes beating it means just doing the thing.
Yeah.
So it's no different from soreness. Like, when someone says, "Oh, like imposter syndrome," how do I cure it? It's like, do you cure soreness? You manage it. You're going to experience it. It's fine, but sometimes it's too much. Sometimes you push through and you train and you just get it done. And sometimes you do need to back off a session. And the same feeling with imposter syndrome. Like, do I just accept the job and let these feelings happen? Or do I acknowledge, like, you know what? Maybe there's a smaller step. Maybe I'm not qualified yet, or something along those lines.
How do we know?
Ooh.
The hardest question of them all.
It really is, because, and here's why I think it's not just hard, but it's unanswerable. I'm totally going to butcher the quote. Jean-Luc Picard from Next Generation, there's a great line, but paraphrased, he essentially says, sometimes you can do everything right and still fail. That's not a mistake. That's just how life is. I totally butcher that. The Trekkies are going to come out and murder me. But it's part of the problem with coaching, is that sometimes you do everything right with your client and they leave, or they don't hit their goals. Something doesn't happen because of that relationship. So there are ways to manage the feeling, and ways to smart project management steps we can take to ensure I am as qualified and ready as I can reasonably be.
Reasonably be. That's good.
And then we have to accept that we might not get that really clear validation. Like, yes, I made the right call.
Are there any objective things we can use to kind of fluff our egos? Like in the coaching world, we're just like, okay, well, if your client is doing this and if you're doing this, you are probably working towards doing things, air quotes around, right.
I think there are ways we can do it wrong that we cannot do. We can choose not to do. So in some ways, when I look at how do I cure or manage or deal with imposter syndrome, I'm like, stop being an imposter. If you pretend expertise that you don't have, on the spot, your client asks a question and you answer it confidently, but you really don't know the answer. The moment that client leaves, that feeling settles in of like, oh
my God, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, they might come back with a better question, or they might know, or they might realize that, I wasn't really that confident. So don't. Yeah. People don't need us to have all the answers all the time. And it's okay to say, I don't know, I don't know, I'll find out. The second, a couple of other, frames that I try to use for managing it are collaborating with the client instead of directing. I'm not an engineer fixing them like a car. I have an expertise, a knowledge where I think it's more likely to be successful here. So I talk them through why I'm suggesting and making the program choices that I make, and let them buy in. Because the two of you are together. It's not so much I made a mistake, so they failed. It's like, we decided this together, and if it doesn't work, we'll decide on the next thing together.
Seems like that's a good way to make sure you're really aligned on the priorities of the relationship, which can kind of, I think, give you some security when you're wrestling with am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? Am I going in the right direction? If the priorities are clear, that's at least some sort of compass to guide the choices that you have to make. And it can also, and let me know if this is a good thing or not, but give you some metrics to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, you can, I think yes and no. When it comes to metrics and their value, in terms of managing imposter syndrome, I think we absolutely having something to be like, hey, you saw your squat go up by 30 pounds. So something's working. So actually tracking something meaningful and measurable, a meaningful metric to the client
Yeah.
is very important. And you can always fall back on that and go like, whew. But on the other hand, that means that the metric has to be meaningful.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes we can, when the client leaves and says, I wasn't satisfied, I hated the experience, but their deadlift went up 150 pounds,
Didn't
from
matter
when they
to them.
started. Yeah. And that's when the imposter, like, to me, that's when it feels worse. It's like, what did I totally miss? So finding that meaningful metric, and to me, what that does is it helps mentally reframe, because we can, when I know it's probably imposter syndrome and not just imposter feelings, is when it's tied up with like catastrophizing.
Oh, okay.
So cognitive behavioral therapy has all these cognitive distortions that they try to talk you through. But if you're catastrophizing, so you're like, I'm always a failure, or I've never succeeded at this. Well, that metric kind of helps you go, wait a minute. I've succeeded with the last 4 out of the last 5 clients, and the 5th we were working on, and maybe things didn't go well. So I'm not always a failure. Like, that's when you realize, like, okay, I'm lying to myself a little bit here. I am, and there are other, distortions that we end up making too. It really could be anything. So like the control fallacy. It went wrong, so it's my fault. We just talked about it.
Okay.
It's not always your fault.
Yeah.
You can't always blame it. Or emotional reasoning. The fact that I'm feeling like a fraud means I'm a fraud.
Okay. Ooh.
So anytime we feel our brain go off the rails, maybe maybe we need to roll back, maybe we need to lean in, but at the very least we can stop and re-rail our brains and like make sure we're on the right track. We're not, negative self-talking ourselves out of a rational choice here.
Man, yeah, that's tough to do when you're like stressed out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. For me, I never feel imposter syndrome when I'm feeling physically great. Like when I'm sleeping well and eating well and my training is going good, bad things happen and I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
We'll deal with it.
Yep.
It's usually when, stress is high, brown stuff's hitting the spinny stuff and I'm not sleeping well. And you never heard that one?
No.
Anyway, it's like those times, that's when it's like the imposter feeling sneaks in and then I'm just flattened for like a week.
Totally. You're just like, well, there's another thing that I'm bad at. Awesome.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of layers in on the physical, which when it comes to coaches, we're the worst when it comes to like, especially back when I was, in an in-person facility at like, I'm going to work, 8 classes a day at CrossFit and manage my training and do all this and do all that. So sleep and diet are the first things to go out the window. And then it starts to all kind of crumple in.
Yeah, totally. So, man, that's such a good observation. I'm actually going to start paying more attention to that in times of lower sleep, higher stress, noticing if I'm feeling those imposter moments and being like, okay, what you need is a good night's sleep.
There was sometimes I feel like sometimes we need to have a conversation with ourselves a little bit. Yeah. There's like good me, like me feeling in a good state and I'm like cruising, jiving me. Mm-hmm. And then there's imposter me, like need to have a chat sometimes. And when we're looking at conversations with other people, there's a great acronym I like, which is HALT. Which is if things start feeling like they're getting intense or like something's wrong, stop. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired right now?
Oh, yes. Where did I hear that? I wonder if it was true. Yeah, but yeah, I recently heard that and it's so good because you can get so foggy from all of those things. And if you have those needs met, which you can do over lunch with a friend and a nap, it's like a totally different experience.
Yeah. And part of that is so like if the imposter me is yelling at me, is having that conversation, it's like, wait a minute. Am I hungry, angry, lonely, tired? In the sense of, am I in a good place right now to judge this and assess this and feel these things? Probably not. I'm still going to feel it. It's still going to feel like crap. But at least I can postpone any decisions until I can, get some food, take a nap.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, I love that. Okay. So step number 1 to tackling imposter syndrome is do the HALT checklist.
Yeah. If we were to put them in steps, at least from my experience, I would start with me, start with the body. start with my experience and where I'm at right now.
That's excellent. How else do you think are good ways to deal with it?
So there's those cognitive distortions. It's checking in, and there are checklists you can find online if you really want to like beat the hammer into it and like, am I thinking this way? But I think we kind of know. We kind of know when a distortion is just over the top because we hear them all the time. And it's just we never stop to it's about taking that pause and going, but am I being like crazy Ken right now? Like am I being Karen? Like what's the Reddit, the subreddit? Am I the am I being that to myself right now?
Yeah. Like if you send a message to someone, you're in that zone, or if you are sending an email to someone and you actually close it and read it as if it was just sent to you, be like, okay, let's calm down here.
That's great. I think that's actually something I probably need to do more often. That's great. If I were to send it to myself, and there have actually been times when I have texted myself just to see what it would look like when it came through on the other end because I was really angry. And similar situation, like, oh my God, I was about to send that. Like,
no good will come of this.
And so the next thing, I guess, if we were to have a third step then, so there's manage your body, manage your brain, and then manage your decisions.
Oh, okay.
So I'm kind of, everything conveniently starts with manage, but we'll see. We'll see what happens on step 4. But so am I ready to actually tackle this and make a decision? If not, do I have to make a decision now?
Oh, okay. What's an example? Like decision, like someone asks you a hard question or?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is taking a job offer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So very rarely do people come and say, like they give you a job offer and it's like, you have to answer in 5 minutes or it's going away.
Yeah, really. Only in the movies does that happen, it seems like. Yeah.
Right. I mean, maybe most of the time you have some time to think about it. So you can let the wave pass and you might still say no at the end of it. But you can let the wave pass and manage it. Another way we can manage our decisions is go small. For me, in terms of imposter syndrome or imposter experiences, it's like being invited to speak in front of a conference. My initial response is, oh my God, like this is too much and I'm not going to be ready for this. It's like, wait a minute, this conference is 8 months out.
Yeah.
And this was Sully who invited me this time. I'm like, okay, I'm going to put together material for a month. And if this doesn't, like, if I just can't, my brain's not working, I'm not confident, and that things are moving in the right direction, I'll tell Sully he'll still have 7 months to find a new speaker. Everything will be okay.
I call this the ... yet, where it's like, I'm not a this. I can't do that. And just ... yet. Like, it's okay if you're not this right now. You have some time to be it. But don't doom yourself and say that you're not that right now. You can be that yet.
I like that.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be capital letter that, capital letter T, like whatever that thing is. Another classic example, a client comes up, a basketball player, or maybe it's the first professional client you're working with. They come to you and then you're like, the stakes are high. We talked about that last week a little bit, the stakes, of a client. And then all of a sudden those feelings come up and it's like, wait a minute, we could do a 3-month trial. Like we could do a 3-month, you work with me for 3 months and we're going to sit down and decide, is this working for you? There's no reason you have to be like, oh my God, if this person signs on with me, I'm responsible for whether they make the MBA in 4 years. No.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility to put on yourself. Yeah. Love it. Any more ideas?
Since it is tied to the anxiety and depression, you might have to see a professional. For some people, it's just, and I said have to makes it sound like, you couldn't manage it yourself, you failed. No,
yeah.
like it may be that you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, you just have anxiety.
Yeah.
Like,
and it's so nice to talk to someone when you're going through that.
Yeah. It is. And somebody who works with people who have anxiety, who have that kind of that perspective that you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, so that one's, always on the table and obvious. And there may be you may need medication for it. Like some people absolutely need that to manage anxiety and depression. There's nothing wrong with that. And if I was going to offer a last one, it would be to address, manage because it's convenient, but manage your environment. I think this is a personal pet peeve of mine. Like there's so many business coaches, 6-figure business coaches in the strength coaching world and in the coaching world in general who teach us to be imposters.
Oh, interesting.
And when watching them invoke these strategies and realizing like we kind of play ourselves, we kind of put ourselves in that position. So back off. Just as an example, because that probably sounded really abstract. I was in a coaching group and somebody had a bad launch. They had one person sign up and they were advised by a business coach who was also in that group. Don't apologize or don't try to coach them, because one person in a group program isn't going to be good. Instead, tell them that you were so busy that they're 7th on the waiting list. And then like build up your market, build up your branding, and run the launch again in a few months. And maybe on your second launch, you'll be able to capture this person.
Mm.
And there was definitely like some friction, there were some people who were like, that doesn't feel right? Because the client would never know. The client is just like, oh, wow, this person's busy. I got it. Next time it launches, I'll sign up for the waiting list, whatever. But the coach knows.
Yeah. That feels gross.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we find ourselves doing stuff like that, we can stop and say, it doesn't matter if my client isn't harmed by this. It doesn't matter that other coaches will look and go, okay, you do what you've got to do to keep the doors open. That doesn't matter. What matters is that I am going to feel like crap walking out of this interaction. And I matter to me. Like my feelings of competence matter to me, and I can't do that.
Yeah. And what's more important, like getting to work with a client or getting to say that you sold out an opening? Come back to your priorities.
What happens when, there's always that feeling like, maybe the client will find me out, whatever. But when that starts weighing down on you and a thing and another thing and another thing and another thing, it either impacts our ability to coach, like these imposter syndrome feelings start overloading and actually affect our ability to do work. Or there's kind of that, like, I think there's a breaking point where we look at some con men, we look at some really kind of sleazy just people in the world, and they did it long enough that they just stopped caring.
Right.
You can't live under that weight for forever. So eventually they just went, everyone does this. It doesn't matter, and they talked themselves out of these feelings.
They wanted to be imposters. Yeah.
Eventually, or they felt it was necessary. And eventually what is necessary is okay. Like if we tell ourselves for long enough, this is necessary. This is how everyone does it. This is what it takes to win. Then after years of hearing that message, you don't even think about it. That's just how, the business runs until you're, not to get like melodramatic here. Yeah. Enron, Theranos, whatever. But people don't wake up one morning and blow $1 billion operation. Like that takes years of telling ourselves a story about what it takes.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure all of you who are listening have felt this before or haven't felt it yet. And if you haven't, you might be a sociopath.
I like
I'm
that.
just kidding.
You haven't felt it ...
Yet. Growth mindset. But I loved what you said earlier, that when you're feeling it, it's because you know that you care. Like it's because you care. And I think that's comforting because that's an indicator that you're doing something that's important to you. And so it's worth going through that moment of discomfort to kind of push past and see who you can be on the other side. Yeah. Well, thank you, CJ. Yeah, that was fantastic. And I hope this helps you all out there. And, be nice to your coaches. We're all growing.
That's a piece too. Actually, like, not to like, end it on a quick note, but
yeah.
It's so funny. We as coaches think that our clients, are constantly watching and judging us and
Some
like
of
they're
them
just
are.
waiting. Maybe, right?
Yeah.
But when us as clients, how judgy are we? Like how
Oh, yeah.
quick are we to turn? Honestly, most of the time, if our coach said, hey, sorry, I'm feeling like on the platform, for instance, I'm feeling really off today. I'm a little bit slow. Like something looks a little bit wrong, but let's catch on video. We'll watch it later. Like any kind of talk through, whatever the conversation is, most of the time we're like, yeah, okay, I got it. You're human.
Yeah.
And part of it is recognizing that, not only do you not have to pretend to be the expert, you can also admit to being human.
Yeah. I would way rather have someone respond to me in that way because it shows that they care enough to respond fully when they can versus just saying something that they think I want to hear. They're just assuming what I want to hear. And that I don't like when people do that. So, yeah.
Amen.
Good point. Yeah. All right. Awesome, everybody. Well, thank you again for listening. Thank you so much for being here, CJ. That was fantastic. And if you loved us, give us a 5-star review. If you didn't love us, give us a 5-star review. Just kidding. Do what you want. And we will see you next time.
Catch you around.